Alright, so I wasn't sure I was going to make a video, but I feel the obligation to respond to a video that I just saw from some young man who was espousing a view that I really want to suggest is part of what I take to be some of the main problems of contemporary culture, and it is the most self-pandering, self-indulgent individualism that I can think of. This was a person who was arrogantly espousing the non-existence of God while simultaneously espousing the fact that there very likely is an afterlife, or at least there's no evidence that there's not an afterlife. This is the kind of ridiculousness that is plaguing people's thought. If you can't see the problem with this kind of thought, if you can't see that deep down these are selfish, scared little animals who are frightened of their own death and are constructing fantasies to help stave off that fear. You know, in the ancient world, it was very, very commonplace for people to believe in some kind of deity or divinity. They believed in the gods, or they believed in God. They believed in the spirits or the fates, divine providence. There was a recognition that everything around them, including them, had a kind of divine mystery and order to it. And then somehow along the way, monotheism came to reign. It had largely to do with the emergence of the individual. People who need to know about this has to do with the history of literacy, but literacy and money, they gave the individual a kind of reality or a credence that ran concurrent with the rise of monotheism. Now, today, there are tons of people who don't believe in any kind of God but believe in an afterlife. You have to be kidding me. That is so ridiculous. I could spin it a completely different way. I think the time has come for people to wise up. Try to think about it this way. We do this sort of move all the time. We say, here's what I know, and then here's everything else in the world. So we sort of do this division where we say, okay, here's all the things that are out in the world, and then there's just what I know. You can't draw that line. That is the BS line. Every time you try to draw the line between what you know and what's really there in the world, that's really just you in your head trying to draw that line. I bring up this issue because I think too many people haven't really seriously thought about their own motives for the beliefs that they have. They seem not to recognize the obvious, and I mean all too obvious, motives for belief in an afterlife. I think if people wanted to think about things, they would really seriously take a moment to ask themselves about that question. Is it possible to separate off what you know from what there is in the world? Every time you try to draw that distinction, that's just you in your head drawing that distinction. Right? What that means is there is no such thing as death for the dead. Death is something that only exists for the living. There is life eternal. Life eternal is all that you've ever known, because as soon as you were born, you came into life eternal, and now you're participating in what is eternally alive. You're not eternal. You're a place and moment of its self-awareness. Death is a hoax that's played upon the living. When you're alive, you're part of life eternal. When you die, it's like going back to where you were before you were born. It is so unfortunate that people, in their eagerness to abandon a notion of God, have just replaced it with some sort of radical inevitability determinism. You know, the last video I shot, it's very funny. It sort of forced the issue of people to, in some way, if you're going to say that the universe always was, and that makes sense to you, or if you're going to say there was nothing and then there was something, if either of those make sense to you, you might as well just make an appeal to a divinity, because what you're doing is you're introducing the same level of categorical explanation. You're just using a different word. But there seems to be some notion of ultimate. Now, does this mean a personal God? No, I have no idea. That to me, people who want to haggle about whether or not it's a personal God, is it not a personal God, they're missing the problem of self-relation. Yes, you don't need a personal God. You're already a person, meaning that you're suffering a self-relation, which means that aloneness is impossible. To be a human who speaks is to somehow be subjected to the love of an alien other. It's a distant, distant other, but you're shrouded and enwrapped in that love, and it's made aloneness possible. Yes, you talk to yourself, you relate to yourself, you are the self-relating cosmos. You're a place and moment of the world haunting itself as another. The world can't have itself except by losing itself into bodies which then haunt the world as if it were another. Life is eternal. Humans are not eternal. That's so arrogant. How can people think that? People who don't believe in any kind of God but believe in an afterlife?